Okay, welcome back to episode 14 of Aginspire. My name is Tommy Heffernan. The concept is fairly simple. It's to have interesting conversations with people doing inspiring things in agriculture. My next guest, when I contacted him first, said to me, look, it's been a while since I've been truly involved in agriculture, but it's come up since, just before we went live there, that Des has been involved in agriculture, in be it a small role. Somebody that I have met many years ago now, but had a profound effect on me, and that is Dr. Des Rice. And I suppose, first and foremost, Des, welcome and good morning to you.
Thank you very much for the invite, Tommy. Yeah.
Des, I suppose it's a slight gear change, a little bit left of field for us in our conversation today, about maybe some of the areas that we might get to, but you have been involved in agriculture. I first came across you, I think it was about 12 years ago. I heard you speaking at a veterinary event, and you had a profound effect on me. But I suppose before we go down to that, tell people a little bit about who is Dr. Des Rice, your own story.
Okay. Well, I might do a short summary of it, right? So, I mean, I'm a County Down man.
Yeah.
And I trained as a vet, as you say. I was married. Unfortunately, my wife died last year. I have 5 children and I have 13 grandchildren.
Very good.
So I'm a Northern Ireland man. My career took me, first of all, for a couple of years into veterinary practice in Fermanagh and Cavan. I studied tropical diseases there and went off and worked in El Salvador in South America for 4 years, setting up a veterinary investigation laboratory and doing a lot of field research there, which was a wonderful time. I still have some great Salvadorian friends, and my 2 oldest kids were born there. I returned to there and spent almost 10 years in the veterinary research labs at Stormont, where I specialised in nutritional diseases of livestock. And when I had 5 children aged under 12, I nearly gave my wife a heart attack by leaving my fully pensionable government employment and going out into industry. So we have a company there called Nutrition Services, and we serviced large dairy farmers and beef farmers and other livestock, but I was mainly involved in the dairy industry. And so we were consultants to farmers and to the animal feed industry. And that was a very successful business. But I got more interested in development of people. I was really good at high yielding dairy herds, or in fact high performance dairy herds, whether they be high yielding or not. I worked with a lot of, well, probably the top dairy herds in Northern Ireland, and some of them in the northern part of Southern Ireland and the UK, and did work in Saudi Arabia and different places, where we did a lot of work at that time. But I got to see at that stage a lot of people that I worked with, when they were going out on farms with me. What stopped them wasn't knowledge that I was providing them with. What stopped them was how they interacted with people. So my partner and I had a chat, and we sold the business in 2004, and I became a business and executive coach in 2006, and ran that with 2 others for, my goodness, how long was that? 6, yeah, up until now, really 14 years. But I handed my shares over in that to my colleagues last year, and I now have a voluntary organisation set up called Life Skills, where I go in and teach kids and teachers and parents in school how to manage their emotions. So that's a short summary.
There's a lot of stuff happened, Des, and I know from talking to you in the past and listening to your own story along the way that have influenced that. Talk to me a little bit about El Salvador, because I know that you mentioned you briefly went over it, like it was a brief period of your life. But that role, going to El Salvador, you had quite a profound effect by setting up that diagnostic laboratory in El Salvador. What made you decide that to up sticks? You're obviously not afraid of change and challenge. I like people like you, and I would be quite similar. But what made you go to El Salvador? And talk a little bit about the impact of bringing science to a country like that.
Well, it was marvelous, really. I think I must have been a Latino in a previous existence, because I fitted in there no problem. I failed Irish at O levels. And I had to repeat it because to get into the vet school in Dublin, I needed the Irish. So, I also failed Latin and had to repeat it because you needed Latin at that stage. So I was really not a good linguist. I was a scientific man. But when I went to El Salvador, I learned Spanish in a year, really. I did GCSEs at the end of 12 months and passed it, it was a grade 1 or something, so I fitted in there really well. But there was, look, the old saying, that the one-eyed man is always the leader in the land of the blind. I knew what diseases were, and I knew how to investigate diseases, and it was so beautiful. I had these students coming in from Guatemala Vet School, and they needed to do a project, and I was with my laboratory going, come to me. So we surveyed mastitis, TB, brucellosis. We did so many disease surveys and then published them on it. We ran the first Central American Veterinary Conference in 1977, and they gave me an award. I got an award from the Central American Veterinary Service for it. And all I did was have a bit of fun. We used to be out at 2 o'clock in the morning away in these Land Rovers way out to these dairy farms, because they had what they called dual purpose cows. So they milked the cows in the morning, maybe 2, 3, 4 o'clock. And then the cab went with them for 12 hours. So we had to be out very early to do our mastitis surveys, but it was all, I was young and full of fun, and the crack was great. And it was a really exciting time. But I spent 4 years there, and then come back to settle down. My intention was actually to go back into practice again. I took a job in the veterinary labs for a year to learn a bit about nutrition.
You did a little bit more now than learn a little bit about it, Des, I think.
Well, I sort of did. I did my PhD in vitamin E, selenium, and spent a lot of work on. I got to know a lot about mineral deficiencies and all the nutritional imbalances and whatever, and published a lot of research and whatnot in that. I'm very fortunate with my research career because I've worked with a lot of very good people. I'm not a brilliant scientist by any manner of means, but I worked with really good people, and I seem to be able to do that to find good people to work with.
What was your driver? What was your interest in what got you involved in veterinary and then pushing on to nutrition and then in a research role? What were the things that fascinated you about those roles that kept you interested in?
Well, it started off quite interesting because when I was in El Salvador, right, I ran a project for the University of Florida in Gainesville. They were doing a trace element survey in Latin America, so they wanted somebody in El Salvador to take grass samples, blood samples, liver biopsies, right? I was the only one who could do liver biopsies. So, So the results started coming in, and I wasn't that interested, right? But then I started to realize that sometimes when they were talking about these deficiencies really in the herds that I was working with, right, we started to supplement them and find that it made a difference. So I wasn't really that interested. I was only half interested. And when I came back to the veterinary lab, there happened to be a job going in that department, and I thought I'd take that for a year. And then I got interested, and then I thought, well, I'll finish a PhD. Then my boss left, and I took over his role, but I realized that I wasn't cut out to be a long-term civil servant, nor pure researcher. I was best out with farmers and out with other vets and out with people. So when I was 39, I said, before I'm 40, I'll jump ship. And I had a great job. I was head of this department and fully pensionable employment and 5 young kids. But anyway.
I know. Don't worry. You're talking to. You're mirroring. I went a little bit earlier. I left a safe job in practice to do something similar to challenge myself a bit more. What went through your head then? Was it an easy choice to make? Did you have a gut instinct that you had that interest in people and behavior, or did you procrastinate for many years in this before you did it, or did you just go and say, this is something I want to explore more about?
It's a great question, Tommy, really. I never left a job because I really didn't like it, really, I mean, I could have continued in El Salvador, I could have continued in practice, I could have continued in the lab, but there was something gnawing at me, if that's a word, there was something there saying this isn't really your niche. I did look at a couple of other jobs for a year beforehand, one with Norbrook actually at one stage, but I decided not to go there. And because my PhD was in the area of minerals and whatnot, that was a big area in Australia. So I got asked to apply for a job actually as professor of clinical biochemistry in the University of Murdoch in Western Australia. But I went out to look at that, and my wife was breastfeeding her youngest child, and I wanted her to come with me, and she said, well, I have to bring the baby. So off we headed to Perth with a 6-month-old baby and stayed for 3 weeks. and had a good look around, but decided no, Ireland's the place for us. You know, so that left that behind. And when I did the Norbrook interview, I decided I'm not going to a big company. And then a friend of mine who was a nutritionist who did a lot of work in Saudi for Mastock, used to consult with me when we would be back and forward and whatever. And he had set up his own business a year earlier, and we had a chat one day, and a week later I joined him. No, I had 2 or 3 months notice to work, but so when it happened, I kind of had set my intention, I suppose, really. I think that's a big thing in when you're changing anything, is to have the intention. First of all, you can be confused, but after a while you have to say, right, so my intention is to be whatever it is. And my intention was, at that stage, was to leave the laboratories and become a top-class veterinary nutritionist.
Okay, and you certainly achieved that. When I heard you speak first, Des, I remembered a couple of things. I remember the presentation, your presence, the messaging, but I'm always listening and trying to learn. I remember coming out for the coffee after, and there was a girl who worked with me at the time, and she's still working in the practice, and she said, that man was absolutely brilliant. I've never heard anything like that before. And I said to her, why? She said, because he's talking about real things that affect us individually. You know, like we tend to look at a lot of technical stuff, but we never look at ourselves and the challenges that come upon us. And just before I dive into that, and I know that day you spoke that you didn't go without your own personal challenges in your life. Did that shape some of where you went to with understanding maybe the emotional mastery piece and all that other stuff?
Oh, well, it certainly had a huge impact. It certainly had a huge impact. You know, I mean, I suppose you might say that beforehand I was very driven, do you know what I mean? Basically because of my own family circumstances and whatever. You know, I had a great mum and a great dad, but there were things that happened. You know, my mum became an alcoholic, you know, so, and so one of my big drivers originally was to get away from the farm. I didn't want to be back at home farming again. So that would have been a big driver for me to study veterinary and to never fail an exam, you know, to get that done, right? But then once I became a vet, really, you know, it was kind of, I took a few steps. I wanted to move overseas for a while. I remember seeing one of our lecturers, Brendan Halpin, showed us a video of being in Kenya as a vet, and I thought it'd be lovely to go to Kenya. So that's why I studied tropical diseases in Edinburgh to go to Kenya, and I still haven't been.
You must put that on your to-do list.
We're talking about goals here. One of my goals that I set when I was 50 was to climb Mount Kilimanjaro on my 75th birthday, right?
Okay.
With at least one grandchild. And at that time, none of the kids were married and I had no grandchildren. So I'm still en route for that, you know. So I think it's important to set goals. So my general goal back then would have been, you know, to be good, to be, you know, good or the best at what I did. Now that kind of was good for me, except that it drove me a step too far. Right, because I thought I would to carry the world on my shoulders, and I became kind of the savior for, you know, other family members who were in crisis and, you know, all sorts of things, right? And I ended up burning myself out because at one stage, you know, I had a new home and I was doing sort of DIY. I'd bought a couple of houses near the university that I was renting out to students. I was doing a part-time PhD. We were expecting our fourth child. I was going deaf, so I had to have an ear operation. I've got a prosthesis in both ears, you know, to improve my hearing, which thank God worked. But they made me dizzy and they put me on a tranquilizer called Ativan, which was supposed to be non-addictive, and it turned out to be as addictive as heroin. I spent 2 years of torture and that. Eventually I had to go through cold turkey, come off it, and went through panic attacks, and, you know, it was really, really tough. But I learned that all of this stuff was all due to adrenaline and adrenaline overload and cortisol overload, stress. It took me months to find that out. I used to go to the central library, there was no Google back those days, and read books. I discovered this is bloody simple. I remember reading that book from an Australian psychologist called Dr. Claire Weeks, called Self-Help for Your Nerves. And she says, this is just overproduction of adrenaline. And I got 50% better that day. I said, because if that's all it is, I can control that. And I learned to control that in my late 20s, right? And thank God I've controlled it ever since. Some people would call that a breakdown. I call it a breakthrough, because it started me on a new course. where I can be really good at something without it's not been driven to. And there's things I can say yes to and things I can say no to, and I still do a lot for a lot of people, but I don't have to. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it does, because I suppose for me personally, after being down in Wexford with you, I think it was about 2 or 3 years after that, again, it wasn't a breakdown or anything of dramatic effect, but I was severely stressed in work, taking the pressures of work, and I could feel that cycle of it getting worse and worse and worse. And I remember actually the part of the road I was in the day I rang you on the phone, and you answered the phone. You were very thoughtful with your advice, and forthcoming with just I suppose knowledge and experience that you had, and it was one of the probably steps as I look back in my own career that I effected a change, that I felt like that I took back control over all the busyness of life around me, and it's quite profound, and it's probably why maybe as a vet sometimes I unusually talk about things that maybe vets aren't supposed to be talking about, because I've experienced those things myself, and I've experienced the lack of control and the taking of control. And I think that's it's truly profound. And I suppose if we go into an area that I want to talk to you about is maybe that whole area of mental health and mental well-being, because it's a very topical issue in agriculture. It's something in farming we struggle with at times. I suppose your perspectives on that. You said it's simple. You used the language "it's simple" when you understood and knew how. For a lot of people, that isn't simple, Des. But how do we make it simpler? Is it about having conversations about it? Is it like you said, setting goals? In your talk, you did the timing stimulation, something as simple as breathing. You know, last week I spoke to John Kelly, a dairy farmer, and he talked about meditation, and that's a very powerful tool. So when we say it's easy, it might be easy when you go through it and do it, but for a lot of people who are in that position, it's very difficult.
Yeah, and I don't want to oversimplify it either.
Yeah.
But there are certain, it's like anything, you know, if you're building a house, there are certain foundation tools. And if you build the foundations, then you can put other things on top of that. So let me just, so what happens to our body is, right, when we're disorganized, or as you rightly said, when things are out of control, or appear to be out of control, right? Well, one of our basic human needs is met. We need to have a level of control over our lives, right? And when we don't, there's a part of our brain called our amygdala, right? Which we share with reptiles, right? You know, if you think of this being as the brain, yeah, and this being the thinking brain, well, in here, right, there's a little bit in the middle, yeah, called the amygdala that we share with reptiles, and it runs the show a lot of the time. Everything that you see or hear or sense, right, is assessed by this here for danger. And when it assesses danger, it gets you ready for fight or flight. Now, we're not in the jungle. We don't need to run away from danger, and we don't need to fight danger. But our body's wired that way. And when that happens, our body produces adrenaline and cortisol, which are these two chemicals to get us ready for fight or flight. We can't think straight. Once that happens, we cannot think straight. Our thinking brain switches off, because when we were in the jungle, right, if there was a rustling in the bushes, the last thing you wanted to be doing was standing there thinking, I wonder if there's a large animal or a small one. You're dead. Our brain stops thinking when we're highly emotionally aroused. By that I mean fear and anger, right? Or we might call it nice words like anxious or timid or frustrated or pissed off. It's fear and anger are the two basic emotions, right? So those are the two things I say we can learn to control. Because our brain's tricking us that we're still in the jungle, and we're not. We are not in the jungle. It might seem like a jungle.
Yeah,
we're not, there's not that serious risk. So if we can just realize that this is just excess adrenaline and cortisol, and calm ourselves down. Our brain's fooling us that we're in the jungle. We have got to trick it back again and say, no, we're not. And you can do that by doing long out breaths and muscle relaxation exercises. If your muscles are relaxed and your out breaths are longer than your in breaths, your brain has no other choice but to calm down. Now, it's not easy to do. It's easy to say, but it takes practice to learn to do it. And if you do a long out breath, if anybody's listening to that now and they take a deep breath in and they breathe out slowly, breathe in through the nose and out through the nose, and do a slow out breath, and notice their shoulders relax as they do it, they will notice a difference. And if you learn to do that, it becomes a habit, So that's just one example. So I used to teach things like that when I was still working in the veterinary consultancy world, and teach that to feed reps and whatever, teach them how to listen to their clients. I used to always tell people, stop selling, listen to your clients and find out what their needs are. What's the problem they have? Do they have a fertility problem or a stomach problem? And if you can help them, help them. And if you can't, tell them who can. And if you can provide a service to them or a feed to them that'll help solve their problem, or a way of telling them to feed, then you're in business. Stop selling, because it just doesn't work. It stresses you out and stresses them out.
How did you go then? So I think we've kind of jumped into it, but how did you go in to formalize your coaching then? You became a coach. You obviously you did some training.
I did quite a lot of training. So I sold my business to Associated British Foods, who were a client of ours, in 2004, which was a good year for me, because that was the same year I got an OBE from the Queen for services to agriculture, which I tell you was an unpredictable thing. You know, here was somebody who was a basket case for 3 months, whatever that was, 18 years earlier, and had been able to not just get my own life together, but be a contribution to others. So I'd already started coaching. You know, I used to give talks to reps on listening. I used to give talks to, you know, technical people on how to listen to clients, how to deal with difficult clients, which is about staying calm. You know, the guy's upset because his cows are not milking well. You know, no point, you know, just calm down, listen to him, get him to explain it to you. So I'd already done quite a bit of work in that arena. But when the day that I sold the business in 2004, I started to train as a coach. And my plan was that I had a 2-year workout to do that. In 2006, I would be fully qualified. And I was. In Patrick's Day 2006, was the end of my workout, and I got my certificate then, and I set up the business, not knowing, it was kind of almost like I wasn't sure if I would set up a business or not, but it turned out to be a great business. And yeah, with a lot of brilliant clients, and some of those, as I say, are involved. You know, Fane Valley Co-op are a big client of mine, and a company called Filio UK in Ireland, who guys used to work for me, and now I do coaching in their businesses. You know. So I coach a lot of it, do executive coaching. We do team coaching, getting teams to work out how to do things together. And it's a real privilege. It's an absolute honor to work with people like that. And I just love it to be helping these young, enthusiastic, bright people to get bigger and stronger and develop. I don't do any on-farm work at the minute, but I work with a lot of people who are on farm, you know, so.
Des, I want to just go back to maybe a little bit to the agriculture piece before we move on here. I know it's kind of jumping around a little bit, but I just want to get your perspectives, because we had a conversation before we pressed record about the microbiome of the ruminant animal, our own microbiome in the gut, and how important that is to health. I just want to get, maybe, I suppose you've been involved intensely in that nutrition piece. You've also been involved in agriculture, dipping in and out. 2 questions I have maybe in agriculture is, because you sort of alluded to before we pressed record earlier on, was how important nutrition is for animals and humans, and where the future is there, and maybe get your perspective as well on the whole environmental piece around farming. Would you have time to answer those 2?
Yeah, I would love to, really. You know, so I suppose really the reason that I was able to make a name for myself as a veterinary nutritionist was that my motto was always keep the rumen right. If you feed, you're not feeding the cow, you're feeding the rumen. And if you feed the rumen will feed the cow. So basically what we were doing there was we were feeding the microbes in the rumen. And if you can feed those properly and keep it what we now call the microbiome, and the microbiome is just a name for all the different microbes that are in that arena, in the rumen. But as you said to yourself, really, our gut microbiome is a hugely important one. But just back to the ruminant for a while, really, right? Technology has moved on so much really now that we can now get a far better picture of all those different microbes in there and understand the microbiome. And the more we do that, the more we realize, right, is that there's so many things in our whole environment. Now, I mean the huge environment, the environmental issues we have today, right down to the environment of the cow's gut and the environment of the human gut. And if we can learn to control these microbes, right? And bit by bit, we're learning how to do this, right? We can control the environment. And I'm luckily involved with, as mentioned, the two companies earlier on, particularly one called Filio, that their whole business is around adjusting microbiomes, right? And I wish I was 35 years of age again, because I would be involved in that whole arena. And there's a few guys from the Republic of Ireland in that company, and they're brilliant, and they're just so keen, and they're out there with farms every day, and it's so exciting because it improves cow performance, but it also decreases the gases that are produced. But then take it at a wider thing. You hear this criticism about farmers, right? That farmers are the problem. Now, farmers are doing what farmers do. But here's my opinion, that this environmental problems will not be solved without farmers. Farmers are not the problem, farmers are the solution. If you want to capture carbon, right? If you want to reduce greenhouse gases, right? And you give farmers the goals on how to do that, they will set up their businesses to do that. They're never the devils. They're always doing what they've been asked to do and asked to provide, and I think it'll make a profound difference. And that whole area of the microbiome and understanding microbiology and what microbes we can use, I think is going to make a profound difference in this whole arena in the years to come.
It's good to get your perspective on that, because I think it's really important because of your experience, not just currently, but in past, that it is a conversation that probably has been a theme throughout a lot of the Aginspire conversations, was that of the environment. And is farming the solution? And I think you make a valid point and it was happened last week with John Kelly, that there needs to be more discussion between farmers, environmentalists, and a clearer path forward. I don't think we have that yet, Des, but it's good to get your perspective on that as well as everything else. Des, how does somebody start that process? Because it's hard is setting goals, recognizing where you are. It seems, like it's kind of, it can be a hard process to do. So where do you start with somebody who wants to, because we talk a lot about technical efficiencies on farm, we talk about technical efficiency. To go back to personal efficiency, what are the lessons that you've learned in your experience? And I've talked to some of the people that you've coached and have had a profound effect on. Where does a person start when they're trying to look maybe at personal efficiency and personal development as such? Is it goal setting? Is it knowing where you are? Is it knowing where you're weak? Is it knowing where you need to focus your strengths on? Is there a process to it?
Well, there is. And I'm not totally process driven, because very often when I meet someone, I just have a conversation with them about what, and the quite simple questions like, so what's working well in your life?
Yeah.
And what's not working so well? And we usually start to work on what's not working so well. And even in businesses, and I have the authority we don't do work in any business unless we're dealing from chief executive down.
Okay.
So very often, even though we're in a business, we'll set personal goals for people, because if their home life's not working, their business life's not going to work. So, I would coach people in businesses about how to improve their relationship with their wife, you know what I mean? Or, how to be a better dad, or how to be more assertive, or how to control their anger. You know what I mean? So, because those are big things, really. I remember one farmer coming to me, right? One farmer who shall remain nameless, very successful, not just as a farmer, but in a whole lot of ways, right? And he couldn't keep staff. And some of his language was quite sweet about them. And I would say, what happened? But he says, I tell them what to do and they don't do it. And then they leave. And I said, well, do you ever ask them why they don't do what you told them? No, he says, why would I do that? So I've told them what to do. But I says, maybe they don't understand you. Maybe they can't do it the way you want them to do it. So I taught them listening skills. I taught them how to listen, reflective listening, where you listen to someone and you repeat back what they've said. Well, so the reason you're not doing this is because you find that by the time you've that done and that done, you're rushing, so it becomes a rush. Okay. I said, at least you've understood them now. Doesn't mean you agree with them. Anyway, a few years later, he's learned how to listen to his staff. He tells them what he wants them to do. He listens to them before they even start. Have you got that? Tell me more about that. And so I taught him how to listen to them. And I said, so the listening's working for you? Des, he says, that's not the best benefit of it. That's not the best benefit. He says, when I listen to the girls like that, he said, they absolutely love it. They improve their relationships. They're married and, great guy. Great guy. So I start where the person, you scratch where the person's itching first.
Okay.
you scratch where the person's itching. And then you start to look at, okay, so what are the other areas that you want to look at, so, and I mean, if we sometimes break their life down into what we call a wheel of life or a wheel of work, so what is it, do you want it more cows? Do you want to be the most efficient? And what's your relationships like with your staff? What's your relationship like with your family? What are your finances like? How good are you at managing? So just going through it with that and saying, and we get to look at, what's the area that most needs work on? And we'll pick one or two and we'll work on it. And that could take 6 months or it could take a year.
Are we good at stopping? Are we good at stopping to assess where we're going in general? Or do we just keep, I notice people just keep driving on.
Totally. I mean, and it's so important to stop and reassess. See where you want to go to, or what is driving you. And some of us are driven, by things that are no longer appropriate. You get people who are, including myself, you know what I mean? People who are 50 years old and they're still trying to prove to their dad that they're a good son and whatever, even though the dad's dead 10 years, So, it's good to just stop and have a look and see what's driving me. Do you know what I mean? But here's the beauty of coaching, right? There could be 5 or 6 things not working, but if you pick the 1 or 2 that are the most important to work on, very often they always work out themselves. You very rarely have to come to the 3rd, 4th, and 5th one because people kind of seem to be able to work it out. Yeah. People seem to be able to work it out. I mean, I've seen cases where people come to me saying, I want to change my job. I'm no longer happy in this role. And you start to coach them and you ask them, so tell me more about your life. And they're married recently and have 2 young kids and we're very busy and blah, blah, blah. And then, you just in general conversation comes up that he used to love football and he used to coach in the football team. You don't do that anymore, no. And then I would love to do that. I would love to be back coaching the kids. Having time. Let's see how you could find an hour once a week. And then the guy does that. And 6 months later, he's back, he's coaching, he's involved in that, and he loves it and whatever, right? No mention of leaving the job. No mention of leaving the job. So when you're coaching, a friend of mine used to say, you've got to make sure you put the emphasis on the right syllable.
Say that again, Des. The emphasis on the...
You've got to make sure you put the emphasis on the right syllable.
Okay.
Or the other coaching saying is, right, that sometimes we're so busy climbing the ladder that when we get to the top of the ladder, right, we discover it's up against the wrong wall. You've got to define the wall first.
How good are people doing that on their own then? Is that something we can do on our own, or do you see a real need for, obviously you developed your business out of that need, but can people go through this process on their own?
The answer is yes and no. Yes, you can do it because the tools are out there. You know what I mean? You go online and find a way of doing a wheel of life or a wheel of business or looking at wheels, right? But what we need to do is to take the time to do it and ask ourselves what are called open questions. Open questions begin with who, what, where, when, and how. So what is it I'm doing? And what is it that I'm not doing? And what is it that's working well? What is it that's not working well? What is it that I'm good at? What is it that I'm not good at? What's missing in my business? Huh? Where are the gaps? Now, you'll not do that in 10 minutes, nor a day, nor a week. You've got to set yourself a process and go through that and really, really look at it. And then start to write it down. And if you don't write your goals down, they'll not happen. I mean, I don't know how many people listen to this, but I tell you now that I guarantee this is true. I'll ask people now, right? If you had a goal in life that was really something you wanted to do and you've never done it, the second question I'll ask them is, did you ever write it down? And 90% of the time they'll say no. You've got to write down what the goal is. Now, it's not enough of a goal to say, I'll run a marathon. A goal is to say, I'll run a marathon by Easter next year. And then you break it into sub-goals. So to do that, I need to start walking. I need to start being able to run a kilometre. Do you know what I mean? And then that's it. And you put those in your diary, it'll happen. Now that's a big one. Now the next question then is, right, so what's the most important goal in life? Is it to climb Mount Kilimanjaro for a charity? Or is it to paint your house? Right? Well, when you sit down and do your audit, and do your list, right? And just see what the impact of that is on not painting your house, right? You know, I mean, is it a stage where it really needs it? Is it really upsetting your wife? You know, is it a huge issue? Then you better deal with that and forget about Kilimanjaro. You've got to do the things that make your life work, not the things that look good, not the things that you think can actually make you a big fella. Now, that's not to say anything wrong with Kilimanjaro. With a function, we all have a role to play, not just in getting our own lives right, but in helping out there in the world. It's really important to be part of community, so it's a great thing to do things for the community. But it's also great to make sure your own life and your own family works well, and do an audit on that. And if you've not been a good husband, well then go on courses to learn how to be a good husband, and stop blaming people. If you're not been, you know, if you're fighting with your husband, if you're blaming people, yep. No, shut up and find out how to communicate clearly. There's a million ways of doing that online. How do we communicate with our husband or our wife and our children? How to be a good dad or a good mum? You know, the information's out there. Not like I had to do when I had my breakdown. I had to go to the central library and go through books in print. You can go online, you can find books and courses and webinars that are really useful. So yes, is it possible to do it on your own? It is. Is it easier if you have someone who's coaching you and asking you these questions and holding you to account each time? Of course it is.
When you look back through that period of your career, or maybe all your career, what are the bits you were very proud of? We'll talk about your charity work now, but what are the things that really you can, or do you look back in that way? Is that a valuable thing to do? Or do you just keep going and seeing where the next challenge is? Or has there been times where has there been periods where you said, look, it's El Salvador or it's the coaching? What's given you the most joy?
Well, I think I said earlier that I've never left a job because I really hated it or didn't like it. You know, I left because there was a chink of the door started to open, and when that happened, I kind of pushed through. But being grateful for what you've achieved and being grateful for other things in your life is a hugely important thing. Gratitude. We have a thing in business, we call it our 6 agreements. And the first one is acknowledgement. That we acknowledge each other, we acknowledge ourselves, and are grateful for the good things that have happened. So I'm absolutely delighted about the good things that have happened in my life, right? And the things that happened that weren't so good have been a way to help me to grow. So what am I proud of? Well, I suppose I'm proud of that I've, you know, I mean, you don't ask for, you know, get awards, but, you know, getting an award, an OBE, and getting from UCD, getting, you know, an alumni award from UCD into 2017, you know, it comes out of the blue, and it's like, who me? There's a mistake here, you know, it's like, so I've never done anything in order to be act a big fella or to look for kudos or whatever. No, I kind of just keep doing what seems to be the right thing to do in a measured way and keep moving on. And I sold my business when it was at its peak. I left the veterinary lab when it was at the peak of my career, you know, and I left CCO. I mean, CCO is still a great business, you know, and I just decided that I now want to involve myself more in the charitable thing. I'm still involved with CCO. I still work with CCO, but not to the same extent. I'm more involved in this charitable venture now.
This charitable venture, because if you want to affect change, you can do it at many levels, but to really do it, we've got to look at education at probably as young as you can go to influence people. And it's very interesting because I have a young family and I see the pressures of the world that are even someone, you know, when I was 30 odd years ago, their age in school, it's a different world they're growing up in now. And, you know, our traditional education system is very curricular based, but some of the most important skills that they will probably learn is the softer skills, communication, dealing with emotions and all that sort of thing. So I from our conversation on the phone, I think that's some of the work you do. But will you explain a little bit to people about your charity work now and what that looks like?
Well, I've been going into businesses, you know, for 15 years, teaching people, chief executives, how to stay calm. But I usually teach most people that because you can think more clearly. If you learn how to stay calm, you can think more clearly and more logically. And you're not just driven, you're not like the gerbil on the wheel going round, doing blah, blah, blah. So very often, all our workshops, all the business that we go into, one of the first things we teach is how to stay calm, emotional mastery. Because you can't have conversations with reptiles. So we teach them how to stay calm, how to listen to each other, and how to speak straight in a way that matters. But I've been teaching that in businesses to adults now for 15 years, and I kept saying, I'm starting them at the wrong age. We should be teaching this in schools. It should be a given that when I'm going to coach, that people know how to stay calm. So I was talking with my daughter-in-law about this as a teacher, and she says it'd be a great idea. So last year, 2019, we went to a few schools and told them what I did, and I said we could go in and we could run a class for the 8 and 9-year-olds, for the teachers and classroom assistants, and for the parents. Same one we do virtually in business. And I thought, well, they'll already know all this, but we'll try it and see. The feedback was phenomenal. We did 3 schools in South Belfast, and the principals were saying you need to get into all the schools to do this. And then COVID came.
Okay.
So we said, well, we'll try doing webinars online. And we started doing that, and we got teachers and other people on. Anybody can come on really who's interested in teaching young kids how to stay calm. And so I think we've trained, we've had about 250 people now on the webinars. We have 40 people who want to be trained teachers, and we're going into football clubs and whatever now, and starting to teach this in football clubs. We have some people from the IFA, the Irish Football Association, and the GAA who are interested. So it's kind of, it's at an early stage, but it's just the demand is phenomenal. I mean, people just want to know this stuff, to realize like that this is, when they hear there's just adrenaline and cortisol overload, and that you can calm yourself down. And once you calm down, you can think clearly, you can think your own way out of it. A good coach doesn't give people solutions, he helps them to think, but first they have to calm down. And it's sometimes why CBT doesn't work for people right away, because CBT, you're asking people questions to think, but first they've got to calm down. Calm them down, they can think their way out of it. So it's called Life Skills, LIFESKILZ.
Very good. I'll put the link in the bio for this conversation. How do you maintain your own energy and enthusiasm, Des, as you keep going? And is it that interaction? I know you mentioned your wife passed at the very start a year ago, and I'm very sorry to hear that, and you explained to me on the phone. For yourself personally, obviously, has been a huge event, and I suppose no matter how good you are with your emotions, that's nothing prepares you for that. So how have you been yourself since your wife has passed?
Well, it's taken everything that I had to manage it, because we met when we were 18. On Lough, would you believe, we met when we were praying that the examiners would go easy on our marking our A-level results. And then I don't know how it all happened. I went off to vet school, she went off to Hull to train as a teacher. But anyway, we were together for a long time, 51 years, and when she died last year. So, and she was my soulmate, she was my young Cara. And I had to learn how to, be a good husband. I mean, anger was a big thing for me as well, that I had to learn how to control. And it was devastating for Anne, But I learned how to control that, much too late in life. But because I didn't know, how to, the information wasn't available. So that's why I teach all this stuff now, really. Do you know what I mean? But I have to manage it all the time. That's my phone, right? And 6 times a day, there's a bleeper goes off there to remind me to do my breathing exercises and my muscle relaxation exercises. I do a lot of relaxation, guided imagery and visualization. And above all, I've got a big goal. And the big goal is that in 5 years' time, I'll have 500 people trained to go into schools and football clubs and whatever to teach people how to stay calm. That's the goal. It'll take everything I have and a bit more to do that. And I'm going to keep working for TCO in the meantime.
You're an extraordinary man, Des. I've met you, as I said, on a few occasions. I suppose I'm inspired by people who want to make a difference in the world, who aren't, nobody of us are perfect. We're all flawed and have our own flaws. But if we're continuously trying to progress and improve through life, we can make a real difference to ourselves and those people around us. I've enjoyed this conversation, I really have. And I think I've no doubt that you will achieve the goal, and the impact that will have is quite profound. And I think your wife Anne will be very proud of you if looking down, you seeing what you're doing and keeping yourself busy to achieve those.
I'll just show you here before we go off, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's her right beside me, keeping an eye on me here.
Keep an eye, a beautiful lady.
She was a beautiful lady. So Tommy, just before we do finish, I'd like to acknowledge you. So thank you, because like what you're doing is amazing as well. You know, and you've gone off piste in many ways, right? But you're still in the whole world of making a difference in the lives of others as well, really, right? And making a career out of it, and that's not easy to do. So I wish you all the luck of the day with it, right? And keep on doing what you're doing, because if you can make a difference in the lives of others, it's called an enlightened self-interest. It's a wonderful term that I learned. You know, so if you do things for the benefit of others, your own life works better. If you do it in order for your own life to work better, it doesn't work so well. You've just got to do it because it's the right thing to do, and then your life works better. Enlightened self-interest. So keep at it, Tommy. You're doing a great job.
I really appreciate those words. They mean an awful lot from yourself. We'll end it there, Des. Continued success, and thank you for, again, another very honest interview. And I think there's nuggets of information for people maybe to reflect on, not in the immediate, but maybe more long-term future. If it's only one person it resonates with, I think that's enough to have had an impact, and I think it will be more than that. Des, take great care. I look forward to maybe meeting you post-COVID and post our COVID lockdown back in the real world again. And from the bottom of my heart, keep up the great work and well done.
Thank you.